On Christmas night, my 3 children laughed while I stood holding an empty plate. "Old man," my eldest son said loudly so everyone in the room could hear, "nobody wants you here. Eat alone." The laughter that followed didn't come from strangers. It came from my own blood. The room smelled of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles. Laughter bounced off the walls, glasses clinked, and Christmas lights blinked like they were celebrating a happiness I was not invited into. I stood there, 72 years old, spine bent slightly forward, hands trembling, not from age, but from something heavier. Humiliation. I looked down at the plate in my hands, white, clean, empty, like the place I now occupied in my children's lives. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard him correctly. Old ears, maybe. Wishful thinking. But then my daughter covered her mouth to hide her smile, and my youngest son shook his head as if I were some embarrassing stranger who had wandered in uninvited. That's when I knew. This wasn't a joke. This was a verdict. Before the story goes any further, let me ask you something. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, please subscribe to the YouTube channel Silent Revenge Story, share this video, and press the bell icon so you never miss a story that speaks the truth many are afraid to say out loud. I had raised these children with hands that bled and a back that broke slowly over decades. Christmas mornings where I pretended I didn't want gifts, just to see their eyes light up when they opened theirs. Nights I slept hungry so they wouldn't. Years I worked overtime while my own dreams quietly starved. And now here I was, standing like a ghost in my own house. "Dad, just sit there," my daughter said, pointing toward a small table near the kitchen. "We're full anyway." The table was barely big enough for one chair. No decorations, no lights, no warmth. It felt less like a place to sit and more like a punishment. I walked there slowly. Every step felt like an apology I never owed. As I sat, I could hear them behind me, talking, laughing, my granddaughter asking why Grandpa wasn't sitting with them. Silence followed. Then my son's voice again, sharp and dismissive. "He likes being alone." I stared at the wall in front of me. A framed family photo hung there, me in the center, holding all 3 of them when they were small. Back when my arms were strong and my presence mattered. My throat tightened. I didn't cry, not because it didn't hurt, but because pain like this doesn't scream. It suffocates. I remembered winters when I walked miles in worn-out shoes so they could have coats. Summers when I skipped meals to pay school fees. I remembered selling my wedding ring when my wife passed away, just to keep the lights on. And now I was too much. Too old, too quiet, too inconvenient. My youngest son walked past me and accidentally, or maybe intentionally, bumped my chair. My fork fell to the floor. The sound echoed louder than it should have. Nobody moved. I bent down slowly, my knees screaming in protest, and picked it up myself. "Careful, Dad," my son said mockingly. "Wouldn't want you breaking something." Something inside me already had. They finished eating, plates scraped, chairs moved, wrapping paper tore open, gifts were exchanged, names were called, everyone's but mine. I sat there the entire time. Invisible. At one point, my daughter's husband glanced at me, then looked away quickly. Shame flickered across his face, but not enough to change anything. That hurt more than cruelty. Because cruelty is loud, silence is a choice. I thought about leaving, just standing up, putting on my coat and disappearing into the cold. But something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe disbelief, or maybe the faint hope that one of them would stop me. No one did. Later, as they laughed over dessert, my eldest son walked over and placed a small plastic container in front of me. "Leftovers," he said, "you can heat it later." He said it like he was doing me a favor. I nodded, "Thank you." The words tasted bitter. I didn't trust my voice with anything more. Inside that container was more than food. It was proof. proof that I had officially been downgraded from father to burden, from protector to problem. That night in my small room upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my hands. These hands had built their childhood, fixed their bikes, held them through nightmares. Now they shook, not from weakness, but from a truth I never wanted to accept. I had given them everything, and it still wasn't enough. Outside, fireworks went off. Someone was celebrating. I closed my eyes and felt something settle deep inside my chest, not anger, not revenge. Silence. The kind that comes when pain stops asking to be understood. The kind that waits. The morning after Christmas arrived quietly, like it was afraid to disturb the damage already done. I woke up before everyone else. Old habits don't die easily, years of early shifts, years of responsibility. The house was still, too still. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, only empty. I walked downstairs slowly. My knees protested with every step, but I ignored them. Pain had become background noise in my life. What hurt more was the air itself, thick with the knowledge that I no longer belonged. In the kitchen, the table was still messy from the night before. Half-empty glasses, crumbs, wrapping paper stuffed into a corner like trash that hadn't found its place yet. I cleaned quietly. I always cleaned quietly. While washing dishes, I heard voices behind me. My children were awake now. They didn't greet me. They talked over me, around me, like I was furniture. "We should post the photos," my daughter said cheerfully. "Yeah," my eldest son replied. "Best Christmas we've had in years." I froze. Best Christmas? I looked down at my reflection in the sink, an old man with tired eyes and soap-covered hands. I wondered if I had been edited out of those photos already. Or worse, left in, like a joke in the background. Later that afternoon, relatives began to arrive. Cousins, in-laws, people who used to call me uncle with respect. I sat in the living room, upright, hands folded, trying to hold on to whatever dignity I had left. That's when it started. "Dad doesn't eat much anymore," my daughter said loudly to her aunt, glancing in my direction. "Doctor says it's just old age." Old age? Like it was a disease, like it was a failure. "Oh," the aunt replied awkwardly. "That happens, I suppose." My son laughed. "Yeah, he forgets things too. Yesterday he stood in the kitchen for 5 minutes holding a plate." The room laughed softly. I felt every eye turned toward me, curious, judgmental, some pitying, some amused. I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it. What would I say? That I was standing there because my son told me to eat alone. That my plate was empty because no one invited me to sit. No, explaining pain only entertains people who don't feel it. So I smiled. A small, harmless smile, the kind old men used to survive humiliation. "Well," I said calmly, "Christmas makes everyone forgetful." My son rolled his eyes. "See, always joking." The laughter came again, louder this time. Someone patted my shoulder like I was a child who had behaved well. That touch burned. Later, while everyone gathered in the backyard, I heard my daughter whispering to her cousin. "We're thinking of putting Dad in a smaller place," she said. "Somewhere quieter. He doesn't really fit into our lifestyle anymore." Fit? I was a coat that no longer matched the season. "He'll understand," my daughter continued. "He knows we've done enough for him." Enough? I turned away before they noticed me listening. My chest felt tight, like the walls were closing in. I walked into the garage, pretending I needed something. That's where I let myself breathe. I leaned against the cold metal shelf and closed my eyes. My wife's face appeared in my mind, the way she used to look at me when things were hard, like she trusted me to endure. "Stay quiet," her voice seemed to say. "Not everything needs a response." So I stayed quiet. Days passed like this, small humiliations stacked one on top of another, My chair moved away from the dinner table to make space. My belongings shifted without asking, my opinions ignored, my presence tolerated, not welcomed. One evening, I overheard my youngest son talking on the phone. "Yeah, Grandpa lives with us," he said casually. "It's temporary, though." Temporary. I had built this house, brick by brick, paid every bill, protected every corner, and now I was a temporary inconvenience. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the streetlights flicker. Cars passed. People lived their lives. Somewhere, someone was being hugged by their children. Somewhere, an old man was being listened to. Not here. The silence inside me grew heavier. Not angry, not broken. Observant. I began to notice things. How my children argued more when they thought I wasn't listening. How bills were discussed in hushed tones. How my name was mentioned less and less, except when it involved responsibility. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They thought I had nothing left. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that silence can be a weapon. I had lived long enough to understand something they hadn't yet learned. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. One afternoon, my daughter handed me a document. "Just a formality," she said quickly. "It gives us authority to manage things for you, easier for everyone." I looked at the paper, legal words, fine print, control disguised as care. I looked up at her. She avoided my eyes. "When did you prepare this?" I asked gently. She hesitated. "We've been talking about it." Of course they had. "I'll read it," I said. She sighed impatiently. "Dad, it's nothing. You trust us, right?" I folded the paper neatly and handed it back. "I trust myself," I replied softly. Her expression hardened. From that moment on, the atmosphere changed. The smiles became thinner, the patience shorter, the jokes sharper. But I remained calm. Silent. Because something inside me had already shifted. They still saw an old man. They had no idea they were standing on the edge of something they couldn't control. The power didn't shift all at once. It never does. It begins quietly, like a tide pulling back before the wave hits. After the paper incident, my children treated me differently. Not kinder, not harsher, just cautious, as if they weren't sure where I stood anymore, as if the old man they thought they knew had developed edges. I noticed everything. The way my daughter locked her laptop when I entered the room. The way my eldest son lowered his voice when taking phone calls. The way they suddenly remembered to ask, "Dad, are you okay?" Not from concern, but from calculation. They didn't know why yet. But they felt it. One evening while they were out, I went into the study. The room smelled like dust and forgotten intentions. Boxes stacked in the corner held things no one had touched in years. Old files, documents, memories. My memories. I sat down slowly and opened the first box. Deeds, property papers, insurance files, bank statements. Everything I had built, everything they assumed had already slipped from my hands, was still very much mine. I smiled. Not with joy. With clarity. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought age meant confusion. They never realized I had been preparing them for independence my whole life, but never prepared myself to be erased. That night I made a phone call. Then another. Over the next few days I moved quietly. No announcements, no arguments, just action. I updated documents, changed access, redirected statements. I watched from the sidelines as the house slowly changed tone. Bills started arriving later than usual. My son frowned at his phone more often. My daughter snapped over small things. The laughter grew thinner. One morning at breakfast, my eldest son cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, trying to sound casual, "did you change something with the accounts?" I looked up slowly, stirring my tea. "Which accounts?" I asked calmly. He hesitated. "The usual ones." "There are many usual things," I replied. "You'll have to be specific." The room went quiet. "I mean the house expenses," he said. "Utilities, insurance." I nodded. "Yes, I reorganized them." My daughter stiffened. "Why?" "Because they were mine," I answered, "and I prefer order." That was the first crack. They exchanged glances. No one argued. They weren't sure if they could. That afternoon, my daughter followed me into the hallway. "Dad," she said softly, forcing a smile, "you know we're just trying to help you." "I know," I said. Her relief was visible. "And I'm helping myself," I added. Her smile vanished. From that day on, things began to tilt. The authority they assumed was theirs began slipping through their fingers, not because I demanded it back, but because I quietly reclaimed it. I stopped asking permission. I went out when I wanted, returned when I wanted. I took control of my appointments, my finances, my schedule. And most importantly, I stopped explaining myself. That confused them. People who disrespect you depend on your explanations. Silence makes them nervous. One evening, my youngest son confronted me. "You've been distant," he said bluntly. "Is something wrong?" I looked at him, really looked. A grown man who once needed me to tie his shoes. "Distance," I said, "is what happens when people push." He scoffed. "You're being dramatic." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm being accurate." He had no response. The shift became undeniable when relatives visited again. This time, I didn't sit quietly in the corner. I spoke when spoken to, and when not. I corrected false jokes, clarified half-truths, told stories they didn't like remembering. "Dad used to forget things," my daughter joked. I smiled gently. "I remember everything," I said, "especially who stood where when it mattered." The room fell silent. I wasn't cruel. I was precise. Later that night, I overheard my daughter arguing with her husband. "He's different," she whispered angrily. "He's watching us." Her husband replied, "Maybe he always was." That was the moment I knew. The power had shifted. Not outwardly, not dramatically. Internally. They no longer saw a helpless old man. They saw an unknown variable. Something they couldn't predict. 1 week later, I received a letter, official, polite, carefully worded. A legal inquiry regarding property restructuring. I read it slowly, then folded it and placed it back in the envelope. That evening, I joined my children in the living room. "I'll be away for a few days," I said casually. My daughter looked up sharply. "Where?" "Handling personal matters." My eldest son frowned. "Do we need to know?" I met his eyes. "No," I said gently, "you don't." For the first time in years, no one laughed. That night, as I packed a small bag, I felt something unfamiliar but welcome. Control. Not over them. Over myself. They had stripped me of dignity, thinking I had nothing left. They never considered that dignity isn't something you give, it's something you withdraw. And when you do, the silence that follows is terrifying. Because silence, when chosen, is no longer weakness. It's warning. They didn't realize the revenge had already begun. That's the thing about shock. It only works when it arrives without warning. I returned after 3 days. The house felt different the moment I stepped inside. Tense, alert, like a room where a secret had been left open too long. My daughter was on the phone packing. She stopped when she saw me. "You're back early," she said. "Plans change," I replied, placing my bag down calmly. My eldest son came out of the study holding a folder. His face was pale. "Dad," he said carefully, "we need to talk." I nodded, of course. We sat at the dining table, the same one where, days earlier, I had been told to eat alone. Now they were the ones waiting. He slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies of documents, updated, official. You moved the properties, he said, all of them. I reorganized them, I corrected gently. You transferred ownership, my daughter snapped, without telling us. I looked at her, then at my hands resting calmly on the table. I transferred them into a trust, I said, my trust. The room went silent. That's not fair, my youngest son blurted out. We live here. Yes, I said quietly, you live here. They stared at me. But you don't own it, I finished. Shock doesn't scream. It freezes. My daughter stood up. You did this on purpose. Yes, I said. The honesty startled them. You humiliated me on Christmas, I continued, voice steady. Publicly, casually, without regret. That was a joke, my son shouted. No, I said softly, that was a decision. They tried arguing. Accusations flew. Words like selfish, ungrateful, confused were thrown around carelessly. I let them talk. When people panic, they reveal themselves. Finally, my eldest son leaned forward. So what now? Now. I folded my hands. Now, I said, you learn what silence costs. I explained everything slowly. How the house was now legally protected. How financial access had been removed. How decisions required my approval. How I had arranged my own living space elsewhere. You're leaving? My daughter asked, stunned. I already have, I replied. I just hadn't packed yet. Her face twisted. After everything we've done for you. I looked at her carefully. Tell me, I asked, what exactly have you done for me? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. That was the loudest moment of the conversation. I stood up. I won't be staying here much longer. You'll receive formal terms next week, reasonable ones. Terms, my youngest son repeated. Yes, I said, respect is no longer optional. That night they didn't sleep. I know because neither did I. But for the first time, my sleeplessness wasn't fueled by pain. It was fueled by certainty. Over the next week, the shock spread. Relatives called, voices suddenly polite, curious. I heard there was a misunderstanding, my sister said carefully. No, I replied, there was clarity. Word travels fast when power moves quietly. My daughter came to see me 2 days later, alone. She stood in my new living room, eyes scanning the modest but peaceful space. You planned this, she said. Yes. For how long? For as long as it took. Her voice broke. We didn't think you'd actually do anything. I nodded. That was your mistake. She sat down slowly. So this is revenge. I thought for a moment. No, I said, this is consequence. She looked up. Isn't that the same thing? No, I replied. Revenge wants pain, consequence wants balance. She cried then, not loudly, not convincingly. I didn't mean it, she whispered. I didn't comfort her. I know, I said, but meaning isn't required to cause damage. She left quietly. A few days later, my eldest son arrived. He didn't sit. You embarrassed us, he said bitterly. I smiled faintly. Now you know how it feels. He clenched his jaw. We're family. Yes, I said, that's why this hurts. He waited. Is there any way to fix this? I looked at him for a long time. There is, I said finally, but not quickly. What do you want? I stood up. I want what you took without realizing it, I said. Dignity, voice, space. He nodded slowly. And if we give it? Then we start again, I replied, as equals. He exhaled shakily. The shock wasn't just in losing control. It was in realizing they had underestimated the man who gave them everything. They thought I was finished. They never considered that the quietest man in the room is often the one holding the final card. And now Christmas laughter had turned into silence. Not mine. Theirs. Time has a way of revealing what shock cannot. After the dust settled, after the panic calls stopped and the whispers faded, something unfamiliar entered my days. Peace. Not the loud kind, not the celebratory kind, the kind that arrives when you stop begging for a seat at tables where you were never truly welcome. I settled into my new routine easily: morning walks, simple meals, books I had once promised myself I'd read when life slowed down. Life had slowed down now, forced to, perhaps, but not bitterly. My children stayed away for a while. I let them. Distance can be medicine when closeness has turned toxic. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was my granddaughter. "Grandpa," she said softly, "Mom says you don't hate us." I closed my eyes. "No," I said gently, "I don't." "Then why are things like this?" Children always ask the truest questions with the simplest words. "Because," I replied, "love doesn't mean allowing yourself to disappear." There was a pause. "Can I come see you?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "any time." She arrived the next afternoon holding a small paper bag. Inside was a piece of cake she had baked herself. Crooked frosting, too much sugar, perfect. "I saved you the biggest piece," she said proudly. I smiled. And just like that, the cycle shifted. Slowly, carefully, my children began to return, not as owners of my time, but as visitors in it. There were no dramatic apologies, no kneeling confessions. Just effort. My eldest son fixed a chair he once kicked aside. My daughter asked before speaking for me. My youngest son listened, really listened, without interrupting. It wasn't forgiveness yet. It was respect learning how to breathe. One Sunday, they invited me for dinner. I arrived early. The table was set properly. 4 chairs, no side table, no jokes waiting like knives. "Sit here, Dad," my daughter said, pulling out the chair at the center. I looked at her. "Are you sure?" I asked calmly. She swallowed. "Yes." I sat. No applause followed, no speeches. Just quiet understanding. Halfway through the meal, my eldest son cleared his throat. "We were wrong," he said, "not just about Christmas, about everything. No excuses, no explanations. Just truth." I nodded. "I know." That surprised him. You do?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, "because people hurt others when they forget where they came from." My daughter's eyes filled. "We thought you'd always be there, no matter how we treated you." "I was," I said, "but presence without dignity becomes imprisonment." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Reflective. After dinner, as they washed dishes together, something they never used to do, I sat by the window and watched the evening settle. I didn't feel victorious. I felt whole. That night, my granddaughter hugged me tightly. "Grandpa," she whispered, "you're strong." I kissed her hair. "No," I said, "I learned." Weeks passed. The house I once built was still theirs to live in, but now under clear boundaries. Visits became invitations, not obligations. Conversations became two-sided. And when old habits tried to return, I didn't argue. I simply stood up. People respect what they fear losing. One afternoon, my daughter asked quietly, "Do you regret it, standing up to us?" I thought carefully before answering. "I regret waiting so long," I said. She nodded, accepting that truth without defense. On the following Christmas, something changed. There were no grand decorations, no forced cheer. Just a meal together. My plate was full. not because of food, but because no one laughed when I entered the room. Later that night, as laughter echoed gently, not cruelly, I excused myself and stepped outside. Cold air filled my lungs. I thought about the man I was a year ago, standing alone, holding an empty plate, wondering when love became conditional. And I understood something clearly at last. Revenge didn't heal me. Justice did. Justice wasn't about taking something from them. It was about taking myself back. I didn't win. I stood. And that was enough.